The year was 2347, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Council for 92 years. They were the newest species among the stars, the youngest civilization to join the great assembly of alien races. And as far as the elder species were concerned, humans were the least important members of all. Ambassador Daniel Wright stood in the massive crystal chamber of the council hall on the planet, Nexura Prime. The room was larger than any building on Earth, with walls that glowed with soft blue light and ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow. Around him sat representatives from dozens of alien species, each one older and more powerful than humanity. High Counselor Vorath looked down at Daniel from his elevated seat. Vorath was a Velthari, a reptilian creature with scales the color of dark emeralds and eyes that showed no warmth or kindness. He had been ruling the council for over 200 years, and he had never liked humans. "The petition from Earth is denied," Vorath announced, his voice cold and final. "Humans will continue to be restricted to the Outer Rim territories. The core worlds remain closed to your kind. This decision cannot be appealed." Daniel kept his face calm, though anger burned in his chest. This was the 5th petition Earth had submitted in 3 years. Each time they asked for the same rights that other species enjoyed. Each time they were refused. "May I ask why, High Counselor?" Daniel said, keeping his voice respectful. Vorath made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You may ask, but you already know the answer. Humanity is young. Humanity is untested. The core worlds have maintained peace for thousands of years. We will not risk that peace by allowing an unpredictable species to roam freely among them." Other council members nodded in agreement. The Velthari, the Karathi, the Nexari, all the elder races looked at Daniel with the same expression. It was not hatred exactly. It was something worse. It was the look one might give to a child who did not understand why they could not sit at the adult table. Daniel bowed slightly and left the chamber without another word. There was nothing more to say. Words had failed humanity for 92 years. He was beginning to wonder if words would ever be enough. Back on Earth, Admiral Catherine Cole stood in the command center of Horizon's Edge, a massive space station that orbited high above the planet. Catherine was 57 years old, with silver hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. She had spent her entire career serving humanity among the stars, and she had watched her species be humiliated again and again. Her aide, Lieutenant Samuel Perry, approached with a datapad in his hand. He was young, barely 30, but Catherine trusted him completely. "The council rejected our petition," Samuel said quietly. "I expected that." Catherine did not turn from the window where she was watching Earth rotate slowly below. "What else?" Samuel hesitated before answering. "The Velthari are moving ships to the Andros sector. They say it is a training exercise, but our intelligence suggests otherwise." Now Catherine turned. "The Andros sector. That is the only route to New Haven. If they establish a blockade, 30 million colonists will be cut off from Earth. No supplies. No communication. No help." Catherine closed her eyes for a moment. New Haven was humanity's largest colony outside the Sol system. Families lived there. Children were born there. And now the council was positioning itself to strangle that colony into submission just because they could. "Contact Director Morrison at Fleet Command," Catherine said. "Tell him we need to meet privately." Samuel nodded and hurried away. Catherine returned her gaze to Earth. Humanity had survived so much throughout history. Ice ages, plagues, wars that nearly destroyed civilization entirely. They had pulled themselves out of the darkness again and again, always finding a way to continue. And then they had reached the stars thinking they would find wonder and opportunity. Instead, they had found the Council. And the Council had made it very clear that humanity was not welcome. On Nexura Prime, Daniel returned to the human embassy. It was a small building compared to the grand complexes of the elder races. A simple structure of gray stone that looked almost primitive next to the gleaming towers around it. The Council had given humanity this building as a reminder. Stay small. Stay humble. Know your place. Clara Bennett met Daniel at the entrance. She was his assistant and had been for 5 years. She was smart, dedicated, and increasingly frustrated with their impossible situation. "How bad was it?" Clara asked. "About what we expected?" "They want us quiet and obedient." Clara handed Daniel a data pad. "There is something else. The Council passed a new resolution while you were in the chamber. All human vessels are now required to submit to inspection by Council security forces at any time without notice or explanation." Daniel read the resolution carefully. His hands began to shake, not from fear, but from barely controlled rage. This was not just a restriction. This was an insult. This was the Council telling humanity that they had no rights, no sovereignty, no dignity worth respecting. "Get me a secure communication line to Earth," Daniel said. "The President needs to see this immediately." That night, Daniel sat alone in his quarters. Through the window, he could see the alien city stretching toward the horizon. All glittering lights and impossible architecture. It was beautiful, he supposed. But it was a beauty that humanity was never allowed to fully experience. He thought about his grandfather, who had been one of the first humans to meet an alien species. His grandfather had believed that contact with other civilizations would bring humanity into a new age of peace and understanding. He had died still believing that dream. Daniel wondered what his grandfather would think now. Would he still believe in the dream? Or would he understand, as Daniel was beginning to understand, that some species did not want peace and understanding? Some species only wanted power, and they would never share that power willingly. On Earth, President Laura Simmons received the Council's new resolution at 3 in the morning. She read it twice, then set the datapad down on her desk and stared at the wall for a long time. Laura had been president for 6 years. She had spent most of that time trying to improve humanity's position through diplomacy and patience. She had written letters, made speeches, and extended hands of friendship across the galaxy. And what had she received in return? Nothing but contempt. She picked up her communicator and called an emergency meeting of her cabinet. The time for patience was ending. The Council had pushed humanity to the edge. And Laura was beginning to think that the only way forward was to push back. The next morning, the Velthary fleet completed its positioning in the Andros sector. The blockade of New Haven had unofficially begun. 30 million humans woke up that day not knowing that they had become hostages in a game. They did not understand. The storm was coming. And when it arrived, the galaxy would never be the same. 3 months passed after the Council issued their inspection resolution. During that time, things only got worse for humanity. Council patrol ships stopped human vessels at random. Cargo was searched and sometimes confiscated without explanation. Human travelers were questioned for hours about their destinations and purposes. The message was clear: you are not trusted. You are not welcome. You are nothing. Then came the incident that changed everything. Captain Henry Martinez was a simple man who ran a simple cargo ship called the Starlight. Dawn, he had been transporting medical supplies to the colony on New Haven, the same colony that now struggled under the Velthary blockade. His cargo hold was filled with medicine for sick children, equipment for hospitals, and food supplements that the colonists desperately needed. A Velthary patrol intercepted his ship 2 days away from New Haven, Commander Kethros. The patrol leader ordered Henry to prepare for inspection. Henry complied. He had nothing to hide and wanted no trouble. But Commander Kethros wanted trouble. The Velthary soldiers searched the Starlight Dawn for 6 hours. They opened every container, scanned every system, and questioned every crew member. When they found nothing illegal, Kethros simply invented something. "These medical scanners contain restricted technology," Kethros announced, holding up a piece of equipment that any hospital on Earth used daily. "You are all under arrest for smuggling." Henry tried to protest. He showed the Velthary, the purchase records, the shipping manifests, the certification documents. Everything was legal. Everything was proper. But Kethros did not care about documents. He cared about sending a message. 23 humans were taken from the Starlight Dawn that day. The crew members ranged in age from 22 to 61. Among them were for children, passengers traveling to New Haven to join their families. The youngest was a girl named Sophie, who had just turned 7 years old. They were transported to a council detention facility on a cold moon called Banthro Station. There they were placed in small cells with no windows. They were given food once a day and water twice. They were told nothing about the charges against them or when they might receive a trial. On Earth, the news arrived like a bomb exploding in the middle of a quiet room. President Laura Simmons stood before the United Nations in an emergency session. The chamber was completely silent as she spoke. Every representative from every nation watched her with the same expression of shock and anger. For 92 years, humanity has tried to be a good member of the galactic community, Laura said, her voice steady, but filled with controlled emotion. We followed every rule they gave us. We accepted every restriction they placed upon us. We swallowed every insult, every dismissal, every humiliation. We believed that if we were patient enough, respectful enough, quiet enough, we would eventually earn the acceptance we were promised. She paused and looked around the chamber. We were fools. The silence deepened. Today, the Council holds 23 of our citizens prisoner. They include children. They have committed no crime except being human in a galaxy that has decided humans do not deserve rights. The Council expects us to accept this. They expect us to file another petition, make another appeal, and wait another 3 years while our people rot in their cells. Laura shook her head slowly. No, not this time. This time, we respond differently. Behind closed doors, the real planning began. Admiral Catherine Cole met with General Marcus Hayes in a secure room deep beneath the Pentagon. The room had no windows and only one door. What was discussed here would never appear in any official record. Marcus was a tall man with gray hair and a face that showed every year of his long military career. He had been planning for this moment since the day he first put on a uniform. He called his plan Operation Prometheus. We have been preparing for years, Marcus explained, showing Catherine a holographic display of council space. The council thinks they know our capabilities. They believe we have only the ships they have seen, only the weapons they have allowed us to keep. They are completely wrong. Catherine studied the display. It showed council fleet positions, communication networks, supply routes, and defense installations. It also showed something else: hidden bases, secret shipyards, an entire military infrastructure that humanity had built in the shadows while smiling politely at council inspectors. How did we keep this hidden? Catherine asked. Marcus smiled grimly. We learned from the best. Every species that ever underestimated humanity learned too late what we were capable of. We simply made sure the council would learn the same lesson. The plan was not about conquest. Humanity had no desire to rule the galaxy or destroy other species. The plan was about pain. Strategic, precise, devastating pain. Hit them where it hurts. Show them that humanity is not prey. Make them understand that there are consequences for treating humans like animals. Meanwhile, Ambassador Daniel Wright made one final attempt at diplomacy. He was a man who believed in words, who had dedicated his life to the idea that understanding could bridge any gap between peoples. He requested an emergency audience with the council to negotiate the release of the prisoners. High Counselor Vorath granted him 3 minutes. Daniel stood, alone in the massive chamber, surrounded by aliens who looked at him like he was an insect interrupting their dinner. The humans aboard the Starlight Dawn violated council law, Vorath said, not even trying to hide his boredom. They will be tried according to our procedures. Your concerns are irrelevant. Those procedures could take years, Daniel replied. There are children in that facility. One of them is 7 years old. She is alone and frightened, and has done nothing wrong. Vorath tilted his head slightly. Then perhaps your species should teach its children to follow orders. Something broke inside Daniel at that moment. He had spent his entire career believing that words could change things, that patience and reason would eventually overcome prejudice and fear. Standing before Vorath, he finally understood the truth. Some beings did not want understanding. Some beings only understood force. "I will tell my government your response," Daniel said quietly. "I hope you do not regret this decision." Vorath laughed, a harsh clicking sound that echoed through the chamber. "Regret? What could your pathetic species possibly do that would make me regret anything?" Daniel did not answer. He turned and walked away from the council chamber for the last time. 40-8 hours later, humanity formally withdrew from the Galactic Council. The message was simple and direct. We are no longer asking for our rights. We are taking them. On Vanthro Station, little Sophie sat in her cell and wondered when someone would come to take her home. She did not know that millions of people across 100 worlds were about to go to war for her freedom, but she would learn soon enough. The Council received humanity's withdrawal notice and laughed. Across dozens of worlds, alien politicians and military leaders shared jokes about the foolish young species that had finally lost its mind. The Velthari ambassador told reporters that humanity would come crawling back within a week. The Karathi High Command did not even bother to increase their alert status. Why would they? What could humans possibly do? They received their answer 6 hours later, at exactly 0347 Galactic Standard Time. Human strike forces attacked 14 Council communication relay stations simultaneously. These stations were scattered across thousands of light years, connected to every corner of Council space. They had operated without interruption for over 300 years. In less than 10 minutes, they were all destroyed. The attacks were perfect. Human ships appeared from nowhere, launched their weapons with deadly accuracy, and vanished before any defense could respond. There were no survivors at any station. There were no witnesses who could report what had happened. One moment, the stations were operating normally. The next moment, they were expanding clouds of debris. Admiral Catherine Cole watched the reports come in from the bridge of her command ship, Valor's Edge. The massive vessel hung in deep space, far from any system that the Council knew about. Around her, officers worked at their stations with calm efficiency. They had trained for this moment for years. Phase 1 complete, her tactical officer reported. All primary targets destroyed. No human casualties. Catherine nodded. Begin Phase 2. Phase 2 was even more devastating than Phase 1. Human cyber warfare teams launched attacks on the Council's financial networks. Trading hubs that processed trillions of credits and transactions every day suddenly went offline. Banking systems froze. Supply orders vanished into digital voids. The economic machinery that kept the Council functioning began to grind to a halt. At the same time, human special operations teams hit targets throughout Council space. Fuel depots exploded. Sensor arrays went dark. Shipyards found their computer systems infected with viruses that would take months to remove. Everywhere the Council looked, something was breaking. The Council's military responded exactly as humanity expected. They mobilized their massive fleets and sent them racing toward Earth, ready to crush the upstart species once and for all. But when they arrived at the coordinates where their targets should have been, they found nothing but empty space. Human ships had already moved. They had struck their targets and disappeared, using routes and hiding places that the Council did not know existed. The Great Council Armada spent 3 days searching for an enemy that was always somewhere else. High Counselor Vorath called an emergency session of the full Council. For the first time in centuries, the chamber was filled not with routine business, but with genuine fear. "This is an act of war," the Velthari ambassador shouted. "They have attacked our infrastructure, our economy, our very civilization." "Perhaps," said Ambassador Threen of the Meridani, one of the few species that had always argued for treating humanity fairly, "we should not have given them reason to attack." The debate lasted for hours and accomplished nothing. The Council was designed for slow, careful deliberation. It was not designed for crisis. While the elder races argued about procedure and protocol, humanity continued to strike. On the colony of New Haven, 30 million people had been suffering under the Velthari blockade for months. Food was running short. Medicine was nearly gone. Children were beginning to get sick from malnutrition. The colonists had sent message after message to Earth, begging for help. Now that help was finally coming. Commander Diana Foster, led the relief fleet from the bridge of the carrier Resolute. Diana was only 34 years old, young for such an important command. But she had been preparing for this fight her entire career. She knew the Velthari. She had studied their tactics, learned their weaknesses, and designed strategies specifically to exploit them. All ships. Report status, Diana ordered as her fleet emerged from hyperspace near New Haven. One by one, her captains confirmed they were ready. 27 warships, ranging from small destroyers to heavy cruisers. It was not the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled, but it was the most dangerous. Every ship had been modified with weapons the Council did not know existed. Every crew had trained in tactics the Velthari had never seen. The Velthari blockade fleet was larger. They had 35 ships, including their flagship, the Dominion of Velthora, a massive battleship that had never lost a fight. Commander Kethros, the same officer who had arrested the crew of the Starlight Dawn, commanded the blockade. He looked at the approaching human fleet and smiled. "They are outnumbered and outgunned," Kethros told his officers. "This will be over quickly." He was right. It was over quickly. Just not the way he expected. The human fleet did not approach in the traditional formation that the Velthari expected. Instead, Hay scattered, attacking from multiple directions at once. While Kethros tried to coordinate his ships to respond to one threat, two more appeared somewhere else. His ordered battle lines dissolved into chaos. Diana targeted the Velthari command ships specifically. Her intelligence had identified which vessels carried the senior officers who made decisions for the fleet. One by one, those ships were disabled or destroyed. Within an hour, the Velthari fleet was fighting without coordination, each captain making their own choices without guidance. The battle lasted for hours. When it ended, 17 Velthari ships had been destroyed, and 12 more were too damaged to fight. The Dominion of Velthora drifted helplessly through space, its engines dead and its weapons silent. Commander Kethros was alive but captured, along with 300 of his crew. Human casualties were light. 2 destroyers damaged, 1 cruiser with engine problems. Fewer than 50 dead. It was a victory so complete that even Diana had trouble believing it. "Send a message to Earth," Diana ordered. "New Haven is free." The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Council had sent one of its best fleets to blockade a human colony. Humanity had destroyed that fleet in 4 hours. The message was impossible to ignore. Humanity was not the weak, primitive species the Council had believed. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors who had been pushed too far, and now they were pushing back. On Vanthros Station, the guards who watched over the human prisoners began to look nervous. They had heard about the battle at New Haven. They had heard about the attacks on Council infrastructure. They were starting to wonder if keeping human hostages was such a good idea after all. Little. Sophie did not understand what was happening, but she noticed that the guards no longer looked at her with contempt. Now, they looked at her with something closer to fear. Help was coming. She could feel it. 6 months into the war, the Galactic Council was falling apart. No one had expected this. For thousands of years, the Council had been the dominant power in the galaxy. Their fleets were enormous. Their technology was advanced. Their member species numbered in the dozens. When humanity declared war, the Council had expected a quick victory followed by harsh punishment for the rebellious young species. Instead, they found themselves losing. Human forces never tried to conquer territory or occupy planets. They did not want to rule the galaxy. They simply wanted to make the Council hurt. And they were very good at causing pain. Supply convoys disappeared without warning. Military bases went dark for days before anyone could figure out why. Communication networks already damaged from the first attacks remained unreliable despite constant repair efforts. Council members who had lived their entire lives in comfort and security suddenly found themselves wondering if their lights would work tomorrow. On the Velthari homeworld, the capital city of Zenthar was in chaos. The war had been presented to the population as a righteous crusade against primitive human aggressors. Victory was supposed to be quick and glorious. Instead, the citizens of Zenthar woke up every morning to news of another defeat. Another supply shortage? Another failure? Admiral Catherine Cole studied the intelligence reports aboard Valor's Edge and felt a complicated mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. She had never wanted this war. She had joined the fleet to explore the stars and protect her people, not to destroy alien civilizations. But the Council had left humanity no choice. Sometimes the only way to achieve peace was through victory. Our next target, she announced to her command staff, is the Velthury power grid. The room went very quiet. Everyone understood what this meant. The Velthury primary energy distribution network was a massive complex of fusion reactors and transmission stations that powered half the planet's major cities. Attacking it would not kill anyone directly, but it would plunge millions of civilians into darkness. It would shut down hospitals, stop transportation, and create suffering on a scale that could not be ignored. Admiral, her intelligence officer, said carefully, "This will affect civilian populations, hospitals, schools, families." Catherine nodded slowly. "I know. I have thought about this for many sleepless nights. But we cannot win this war by being gentle. The Council must understand that their actions have consequences. They held our children hostage. They starved our colonies. They treated us like animals for nearly a century. If they want this to stop, they know what they need to do." The operation was called Blackout. 3 human strike teams infiltrated Velthury space using routes that the Council's sensors could not detect. They reached the power grid complex in the middle of the night and planted their charges with perfect precision. At exactly midnight local time, the lights went out across half of Elthera. The darkness lasted for 3 days. 3 days of chaos, confusion, and growing fear. Emergency crews worked around the clock to restore power, but every time they fixed one system, another failed. The human cyber warfare teams had been very thorough. When the lights finally came back on, the Velthury people looked at their government with new eyes. They had been told that humans were primitive and weak. They had been told that victory was certain. Now they knew the truth. Humans could reach into the heart of Velthury civilization whenever they chose. Nowhere was safe. While the military campaign continued, Ambassador Daniel Wright worked on a different kind of warfare. He had established secret contact with species who were unhappy with the Council's leadership. The Meridani, who had always advocated for fair treatment of younger species, the Seluxi, who resented how the Velthury dominated Council decisions, the Aranthians, who had their own bitter history with Council. Prejudice. Daniel met with representatives of these species on a hidden station far from any Council patrol routes. The room was small and plain, nothing like the grand chambers where the Council conducted its business. But the conversations that happened here were far more important than anything the Council had discussed in centuries. "We do not want to destroy the Council," Daniel explained carefully. "We want to change it. For too long, the elder species have treated everyone else as inferior. They make the rules, and everyone else must obey without question. This is not justice. This is not cooperation. This is tyranny wearing polite clothes." Ambassador Streen of the Meridani nodded thoughtfully. "Many of us have felt this way for a long time. But we were afraid to speak. The Council punishes those who challenge its authority." "The Council is weak now," Daniel replied. "Their fleets are scattered. Their economy is damaged. Their people are losing faith. This is the moment to push for change. Not in war, but in demanding reform. If enough species stand together, the Council will have no choice but to listen." The negotiations continued for weeks. Progress was slow but steady. One by one, Council members began to withdraw their support from the war effort. The Karathi announced that they would no longer contribute ships. The Nexari refused to share intelligence. The alliance that had held the Council together for millennia was crumbling. On Earth, President Laura Simmons faced her own challenges. The war had been popular at first, a righteous response to decades of mistreatment. But as months passed and the death toll climbed, that support began to fade. Families who had lost sons and daughters in distant battles wanted to know when the fighting would end. Laura addressed the nation from the presidential residence, speaking directly to every citizen who was wondering if the sacrifice was worth it. I understand your pain, she said softly. I feel it too. Every report of casualties crosses my desk. Every name belongs to someone who was loved, who had dreams and hopes and a future that will never come. I carry those names with me always. She paused, gathering herself. But I ask you to remember why we fight. We fight because they took our children and threw them in prison cells. We fight because they told us we did not deserve dignity or respect. We fight because when we asked to be treated as equals, they laughed at us. We did not choose this war, but we will not stop until we have won it. And when we have won, our children will grow up in a galaxy that respects them. That is worth fighting for. That is worth dying for. The speech helped, but Laura knew the truth. Humanity could not sustain this war forever. They needed to end it soon, on their terms. Fortunately, the council was finally ready to talk. 3 days after Laura's speech, a message arrived through diplomatic channels. The council wanted to negotiate. They were ready to discuss terms. Daniel Wright read the message in his small office on the secret station and allowed himself a rare smile. The tide was turning. Humanity had bled for this moment. Now it was time to see if the blood had been worth it. The peace conference took place on Meridani Prime, beautiful world of silver oceans and purple forests. The Meridani had been chosen to host because they had remained neutral throughout the conflict. Their capital city, with its graceful towers and peaceful gardens, seemed almost too pretty for the serious business that was about to happen. Representatives from every council species attended. The chamber was a great circular room with seats arranged in rising tiers around a central platform. For thousands of years, this room had been used to celebrate trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Now it would witness something far more important: the end of a war and the beginning of something new. Ambassador Daniel Wright led the human delegation. He had aged visibly over the past year. His hair had more gray than before, and lines had appeared around his eyes that had not been there when the conflict began. But there was also something stronger in him now. He had seen what his species could do when pushed too far. He had learned that words without strength behind them meant nothing. He would not forget that lesson. High Counselor Vorath was notably absent. 3 weeks before the conference, he had been quietly removed from his position. The council had sacrificed him to show they were serious about change. No one knew where he was now, and no one really cared. His time was over. The new High Counselor was a Selexia named Alendra. She was tall and thin, skin that shimmered like mother of pearl and eyes that seemed to look right through anyone she addressed. Unlike Vorath, she had spent her career advocating for reform within the council. She had argued for decades that treating younger species unfairly would eventually cause disaster. Now everyone knew she had been right. Alendra opened the conference with words that would have been unthinkable 1 year earlier. "We gathered today because we failed," she said, her voice filling the great chamber. The Galactic Council was created to bring species together in cooperation and understanding. Instead, we allowed fear and arrogance to guide our actions. We treated humanity not as partners, but as servants. We denied them rights that every sentient being deserves. And when they demanded the respect that was their due, we answered with force and cruelty. She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. This was wrong. We were wrong. Today, we begin the process of making things right. The negotiations that followed were intense and sometimes difficult. Humanity presented their demands clearly: full recognition as equals within the council, reparations for the colonies and citizens who had suffered under council policies, complete reform of the governance structure to prevent any single species from dominating others, and most importantly, the immediate release of all prisoners, including the 23 people from the Starlight Dawn who had started this entire conflict. Some council members argued. Some complained that the demands were too harsh, but Alendra silenced them with a single question: would you prefer to continue the war? No one wanted that. The council had seen what humanity could do when fighting for survival. They had watched their supposedly invincible fleets get defeated by smaller, faster, smarter opponents. They had felt their comfortable lives disrupted by attacks they could not prevent or predict. They were tired of being afraid. The negotiations lasted 11 days. In the end, humanity got almost everything they asked for. The prisoners were released immediately, transported to Meridani Prime aboard a special ship that arrived during the final session of talks. Daniel Wright was waiting when the ship landed. He stood at the edge of the landing pad, watching the hatch open with an emotion he could not quite name. These 23 people had been through so much. Their imprisonment had sparked a war that changed the galaxy. They deserved to come home to a hero's welcome. The crew of the Starlight Dawn walked down the ramp slowly, blinking in the bright sunlight of Meridani Prime. They looked thin and tired, but they were alive. Captain Henry Martinez came first, supporting an older crew member who had developed a limp during captivity. Behind them came the others, merging one by one into freedom. Last of all came little Sophie. She had grown during her year in prison. She was taller now, and her face had lost some of its childhood softness. But when she saw Daniel waiting for her, she smiled. It was the smile of a child who had been lost and was finally found. Daniel knelt down to meet her eyes. "Hello, Sophie. Do you remember me? I am Ambassador, right? I have been working to bring you home." Sophie nodded seriously. "I knew someone would come. My mom told me that humans never leave each other behind." Daniel felt tears forming in his eyes. "Your mom was right. We never do." The Treaty of Meridani was signed the next day. Daniel added his signature on behalf of humanity, his hands steady despite the emotions churning inside him. When he set down the stylus, he looked up at the assembled delegates. "We never wanted to be your enemies," he said. "We only wanted to be your equals. Remember this moment. Remember what it cost to reach it. And let us build a future where no species ever has to fight for the basic dignity that every thinking being deserves." On Earth, celebrations erupted in cities around the world. People danced in the streets. Fireworks lit up the sky. After 93 years of humiliation and 1 year of war, humanity had finally won respect. Admiral Catherine Cole watched the celebrations from orbit, aboard Valor's Edge. Her crew gathered around viewports, pointing at the lights below and laughing with relief. The war was over. They were going home. "It is really finished," Lieutenant Samuel Perry said softly. Catherine shook her head. "This chapter is finished. History never truly ends. It just turns the page." She was right, of course. The years that followed brought new challenges and new opportunities. The reformed Galactic Council became something genuinely better than what had come before. Human influence spread, not through conquest, but through example. Other species began to adopt human approaches to problem-solving, human styles of cooperation, human ways of never giving up when the odds seemed impossible, and when new species eventually joined the Council. They were welcomed as equals from the very first day. The elder races remembered what had happened when they treated newcomers with contempt. They had no desire to repeat that mistake. On the 10th anniversary of the Treaty of Meridani, there was a special ceremony. A monument was unveiled on the spot where the peace conference had taken place. It showed 23 figures standing together, representing the prisoners whose captivity had started the war. Sophie, now 17 years old, spoke at the ceremony. She was no longer the frightened child who had sat alone in a prison cell. She was a young woman with a scholarship to Earth's best university and dreams of becoming a diplomat like Ambassador, right? "They put us in the dark," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "They thought darkness would make us weak. But darkness is where humans learn to make fire. It is where we learn to look up at the stars and dream of reaching them. The Council tried to keep us small, but they only made us stronger," she smiled. And in that smile was all the hope and determination that had carried humanity through their darkest hour. "They pushed us too far. They regretted it. And they will never forget what they learned about us." The crowd cheered. The sound echoed across the planet and in some ways, across the entire galaxy. Humanity had taken its place among the stars, not because it was given to them, but because they had refused to accept anything less. Never underestimate a species that refuses to give up. The Council had learned this lesson the hard way. they would never forget.